in my published scientific work, I show a picture of Sagittarius A star, which is the black hole-like object, or MECO, at the center of our galaxy. That object is shown to have these tentacles that are mysterious to the people that discovered them. And these tentacles are the emitting source of the light that is seen at cosmological distances. And they are revealed by the picture that NASA made of the object at the center of our galaxy, which is a MECO. And the picture shows very clearly that the surface luminosity that we see at large distances is made in spider-like filaments that go around the object and terminate in a disk structure. The black hole object there is revealed to have a magnetic field of only about a few hundred Gauss. The smaller mass objects that are stellar in size and mass, those objects have the billion Gauss magnetic fields that I spoke of previously. So black holes do have observable magnetic fields, and they have been observed. Now, I hope you'll ask me about how did NASA make this photograph of a black hole object.
Welcome back, listener, to Behind Greatness. We're joined again with our good friend, Rudy Schild. Before we get started with Rudy, we're excited about it, really excited about this. And we have been for the last couple of months since we last recorded. So you'll find the first episode that we recorded in episode 179. So listener, please listen to 179 first if you haven't already, before you dive into this one, or dive into this one if you're brave enough. So today we have back, as I mentioned, Rudy Schild, Dr. Rudy Schild. We're gonna read his bio here, and this will be the last time we read his bio because we're gonna have him on. We expect more than twice, and this being the second time. But we're gonna do it just as a quick reminder to everybody else. So Dr. Rudy Schild is an emeritus research astronomer and astrophysicist at the Harvard Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics, following an extensive career studying dark matter, black holes, and the fluid mechanical origins of cosmic structure. Because of his long association with Dr. John Mack, he has become interested in the formulation of a coherent understanding of the nature of space-time in the universe, and is a champion of the Edgar Mitchell quantum hologram formulation of the nature of existence and reality. He was a founding member and executive director of FREE, Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial Encounters, and as an editor-in-chief, he is an editor-in-chief of the Journal of Cosmology, and he has attempted to broaden the scope of scientific inquiry to include the nature of consciousness and the universe of universes. Rudy, welcome back, man.
It's a tall order, isn't it? And we're going to do all that in 1 hour.
We're gonna try to fit it in an hour. I don't know if we can do this. What do they call it? I don't even know what the saying is. But you have it was a thunderstorm in a bottle or something. I forget the. Do you know what I'm referring to? It's gonna be crazy. So for the listener, when Rudy and I get together telephonically, it is always a fascinating. I'm going to say discussion, but a fascinating listen to what Rudy has done, who he has dealt with. What he has explored as a mathematician, as an astrophysicist, and as a champion of studying consciousness and our reality over many decades. Just fascinating stuff. So I expect more of the same here, of course. So I'm going to ask you a simple question. You told me in one of our earlier conversations before we recorded, and I'm not even going to give you the context, but you said, it is possible to be too successful in your lifetime. Do you remember saying that?
I don't remember it, but I believe it.
Why do you believe it?
That's where I find myself. There is something that you can't possibly understand in the dynamics of scientific research. And that is, if you get too far ahead of the science, then you start making a lot of other scientists wrong, and there will be pushback against that. And my problem is that I don't believe in the cold dark matter theory as it's formulated to explain the origin of cosmic structure. I don't believe in this mysterious dark matter that they're talking about. I believe in the baryonic or the missing hydrogen matter, which I have now discovered in a universal population of planets. I believe that black holes do not have a singularity. And when I say that, please understand that this means that all of the scientific literature that presumes that black holes have an infinite density surface called the event horizon, that exists and cuts off the interior of the black hole from our world, the exterior of the black hole. Now, that is simply wrong. It turns out that it is not an infinite density horizon. It is a finite density horizon limited by what are called Eddington limits. And that's a full 4-hour lecture. The consequence of this is that if you go to the Harvard University Astronomy Library today and look up the word or ask it to tell you how many scientific refereed papers are there which have the word black hole in them, then you will find that there are 776 refereed publications in the literature that reference a wrong theory. The black hole is always meant to be, and always the paper always says in the second paragraph, we adopt a standard black hole model with a singularity, and stop reading right there. There is no singularity. That means a room full of books, if you can imagine 776 of scientific papers, have to be wrong from the second paragraph on. There is no infinite density. Hilbert, the champion of Hilbert spaces, the mathematician, famously said once that mathematicians need a concept of infinity to close the mathematical system. And you know that on the first day of calculus studies, you talk about limits when x goes to infinity. So that's what what infinite it means practically. But Hilbert says, infinity exists nowhere in the physical world. And it's true what he says, but you don't have to believe what a mathematician said. What we have discovered in astronomy is that black hole objects that everybody agrees have a black hole of some kind, but I say it's not a black hole, such objects have strong magnetic fields. This was discovered by radio astronomers at Bonn University about 5 years ago, published in referee journals, and they find that black holes have very strong magnetic fields. So for a solar mass black hole, the strength of the magnetic field is somewhere times 1,000,000 billion Gauss. That I would call a strong magnetic field. And how would that penetrate an infinite density horizon? So black holes, by the classical definition of having a infinite density horizon, are simply wrong. Black holes are, in fact, something with an Edding limited surface, which halted the collapse to a black hole. That's the object that nature makes, and it is predicted in the theory of these objects, which are called magnetic, eternally collapsing objects, to acknowledge in the first word that they're magnetic in character. Those carry an enormous magnetic field, predicted to be, as I say, in the thousands of billions Gauss, immensely stronger than the Earth's magnetic field, immensely stronger than the solar magnetic field. Those are down in the 10 or hundredth of a Gauss range.
So let me interrupt.
In the billion Gauss range.
So MECO, that stands for MECO.
That's right. You've maybe heard me talk
yes.
about a MECO. That's
yes.
MECO, meaning magnetic eternally collapsing object.
So for a layman, and I am a layman, what does this mean for my question making? So if I wanted to ask myself, what am I? Who am I? Why do I exist? How will this help me answer the questions or ask more?
Mm-hmm. It would make a damn bit of difference to you because you don't have the equipment to measure magnetic fields of this strength in astronomical objects. You don't have the telescopes to observe them. But in my published scientific work, I show a picture of Sagittarius A star, which is the black hole-like object, or MECO, at the center of our galaxy. That object is shown to have these tentacles that are mysterious to the people that discovered them. And these tentacles are the emitting source of the light that is seen at cosmological distances. And they are revealed by the picture that NASA made of the object at the center of our galaxy, which is a MECO. And the picture shows very clearly that the surface luminosity that we see at large distances is made in spider-like filaments that go around the object and terminate in a disk structure. The black hole object there is revealed to have a magnetic field of only about a few hundred Gauss. The smaller mass objects that are stellar in size and mass, those objects have the billion Gauss magnetic fields that I spoke of previously. So black holes do have observable magnetic fields, and they have been observed. Now, I hope you'll ask me about how did NASA make this photograph of a black hole object?
That was my second question. So why don't we go to my second then? How did they make it? How did they make it?
Let me rephrase the question then. How was the photograph of the central object of our galaxy, the object at the center of the rotation of our galaxy, which I say is a MECO, not a black hole, was photographed by NASA building a telescope in the back end of a Boeing 747.
What?
This craft had a big sliding door, which went up to slid into the roof and exposed the telescope to the sky. Now, unfortunately, operating at an altitude of, I think, around 46,000 feet, that's above where jets ordinarily fly, but this was optimized to be light enough to go high enough to get above the disturbing Earth atmosphere. And so there still is a little bit of jitter in the airplane because of the upper level atmospheric winds. And so to keep the telescope pointed correctly, what NASA has done is build a clever centering device which keeps the object of study centered in the camera. It does this by, in the field around the center of the galaxy, there are a number of luminous stars. And by making corrections to the flight hardware of the Boeing 747 operate, they steady the operation of the airplane to the extent that they can create a beautifully sharp image, which I will then show you and you can publish that image.
We will.
That image shows that all of the light seen at cosmological distances is made as what astronomers call synchrotron radiation from matter trying to fall to the attractive magnetic field at the center of the galaxy and trying to get there, but being impeded by the pressure of everything that's going away from the center. And so from the outside, it finds leaky paths from the outside along magnetic field lines to the center. Those are curved lines that originate from the source of these electrons, which are Earth-like bodies, Earth mass bodies, but made of primordial hydrogen. And so those are revealed to be the source of the luminosity of the black hole, and the object is shown to be a MECO. It has lines that penetrate to the surface of the compact object, which I'm calling a MECO, and the magnetic lines originate inside the MECO.
So you were the first. You were the first to coin this. This is yours.
Yes. I'm not the first to coin the word MECO. That happened when an Indian astronomer looked at time dilation effects associated with the collapse of an object which did not become a black hole, but because of Eddington limits on the density of matter that the universe can produce, it had to stop short of that. Dr. Stanley Robertson at Southwest Arizona University showed that, in fact, the object which the Indian physicist, whose name is Abhas Mitra, was talking about, is likely to have strong magnetic fields, and those could be and I wrote the paper that says their theory fits exactly the data. So I produced the data. NASA produced the data also with the airplane, the Boeing 747, and the two produced the same results. And I published the paper that showed that what we call black holes are in fact MECOs. And I've been making that case ever since. But what about the authors of the 776 scientific papers in referee literature?
They're not happy with you?
Wiped out. Might as well never have existed.
That's
all wrong.
That's it.
So they do not wish me well.
I can imagine.
And can you see that this is not just a black hole problem, but my studies with gravitational lensing and microlensing, a property of the global scale of the universe, affecting the propagation of light through the universe, they demonstrated that what the other troops in another camp call dark matter is in fact a network of planet mass objects which I can detect, even though they have no luminosity. I can detect them by their gravitational signature, and did so, published this 20, 30 years ago. And there's now another whole other crew of people who don't like the fact that I don't subscribe to their theory of cold dark matter. So I have plenty of people who wish I had never existed. Isn't that odd that you can be too successful?
There it is, bringing us back to the question.
To the question.
To the question. This is a theme that's been pretty consistent through the discussions that we've been having with a lot of researchers here on the podcast, is folks who have gone beyond the edge or past. Yeah, well, I was going to say past the edge, but beyond the edge of current convention, and then being having the door shut behind them because people don't want to see or hear what's being discovered along the edge. Are there people that have been accepting in the community for of your
Yes,
research? Okay.
yes. One of them was put in touch with me accidentally because he's not really in the astronomy community. He is a turbulence expert in the fluid mechanics community. And he was publishing work about the origin of all cosmic structure, all of the galaxies, the voids between the galaxies, all of the clusters of galaxies, the planets, the clusters of stars, the stars themselves, that all was formed in turbulence. So, what happened was that there were times in the universe where you had a big expanding gas cloud, which we call the universe, and we're in it. And that, unfortunately or fortunately, became turbulent in character. The fluid motion suddenly broke into turbulence, according to a Russian theory of turbulence by Kolmogorov, published during the war year 1943. And following that theory, you reach this conclusion that all cosmic structure is formed in turbulence. Now, he predicted that at the time of the universes being changed from an ionized state to a neutral state, don't worry if you don't know what that means, a time long ago and far away, turbulence would have taken over and been the dominant force in the universe and would have restructured everything in the universe to objects on the scales that are known for. The biggest is the cosmic voids, which are basically empty, and all the matter fell off to the surface of the void. Also, it formed clusters of galaxies, so maybe 10,000 galaxies in a cluster of galaxies. Each cluster had galaxies in it, therefore, of the order. Each member of the cluster had maybe 10 million stars, like our own galaxy. And then it's restructured also on a finer scale, the scale of clusters, and then an even finer scale within that, the scale of planets. So I detected that there is a cosmic universal background of planets. Everywhere you look, the dark matter is resolved to be planets.
Wow.
So my discovery, published 20 years ago now, and achieves an enormous amount of attention, highly cited. I think there are 200 or so citations of the scientific paper, which is extraordinary. It turns out that I am, so far as I know, the most cited astronomer today. That is to say, I have the most people reading scientific papers and quoting them and basing their own research on them. I have 11,500 citations to my published scientific works.
Yeah, that's
That's astonishing.
it's a big
Very
deal.
few people reach 1,000.
You have been pushing further in your own research, but your own, I'm going to say, I'm going to go out on a limb here, personal development as well. So you and I spoke of one of our earlier conversations about how you became friends with John Mack and Edgar Mitchell. And we went into, or you went into some really good detail on how you got to know John Mack and his story in the last conversation. We didn't touch upon Edgar Mitchell. So there are a few things here that you also touched upon. So NASA, space, consciousness, that all play a part in your the growing relationship you had started to have with him in the 90s.
That's correct. As a matter of fact, he is a person a lot like me because he found out something in his voyage to the moon Edgar Mitchell was an Apollo 14 astronaut who walked on the moon.
Mm-hmm.
And on the way back, he had a experience of oneness with the universe, a very intense psychological experience which he couldn't understand, and tried to get NASA to explore with him. But NASA wasn't interested. They just wanted to know how many rocks he had brought back. Uh,
Well,
so it
yeah.
describes to me how when he returned to Earth, you recall the spacecraft was lowered underneath a set of parachutes.
Mm-hmm.
It splashed down the Pacific Ocean. A aircraft carrier was in the target region where it was to come down. A helicopter came, retrieved the spacecraft bobbing on the surface of the water, and lifted onto the deck of the aircraft carrier. Edgar described to me how from there they were accompanied immediately from the spacecraft, which was unsealed and opened, and they climbed out onto the deck and walked over to a decontamination trailer.
Okay.
After a several-hour decontamination period, he was taken to another trailer, the debriefing trailer, which had been deposited by crane onto the deck of the aircraft carrier for this mission. And there were the NASA debriefers who has very specific questions regarding the operation of the spacecraft and the things that he had said in conversation on the moon, and so on. But Edgar Mitchell kept trying to interrupt them and saying, "But I want to tell you about this experience that I had in the spacecraft, which was absolutely an astonishing result of my being there isolated in space." And they hadn't wanted no part of it. "No, tell us about the rocks. Tell us about the bag of rocks you collected," and so on. And so he was very frustrated.
Mm.
He came to learn in a short time, after like months, that the experience he had in the return capsule was known to Indian mystics as the Samadhi experience.
Mm-hmm.
In Indian mysticism, or in religious practice, with a suitable ceremony, monks go into a state that they call samadhi, and it's a state in which you feel somehow in contact with the entire universe. You get an ecstatic feeling of being one with all that is. And that was exciting, dramatic, and unexpected. And Edgar Mitchell became relatively uninterested because he thought he had discovered something much bigger than the Apollo mission.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was that he decided for him to do research into this samadhi experience, he would have to part ways with NASA. And these, remember, there were the ticker tape parades in New York City at this point. The astronauts were famous with each launch, and he was prepared to leave all of that behind and submitted his letter of resignation.
This would have been in the early 70s, correct?
This would have been the flight was 1972.
Got it.
And I would guess that the resignation was something like 73, perhaps 74.
Okay.
Then his letter of resignation went to the head of NASA, who was Wernher von Braun.
Who is
Wernher von Braun
Go ahead.
was close to what Edgar was saying. He understood what Edgar had experienced and was trying to say. And so he said to Edgar, "Edgar, I will be very sorry to see you go, but I am willing to approve of this discharge if that is your wish. But I only ask you that before we do all that, you go around to all of the NASA centers. So that would be the JPL labs in Pasadena, California. It would be Houston, where the Apollo program was operated out of. It would be the Goddard Space Flight Center in Maryland, and so on. So get in your jet, go fly to them, and see if you can find any interest within the NASA organization to support an inquiry into your experience within the NASA program. So Edgar did. He got in his jet, flew around to the NASA centers, found zero interest or support, and returned to Washington and reported to Wernher von Braun, and was separated his ways from NASA at that point.
I did not know
He
this
then
part of the
devoted
story.
his career to studying the Samadhi experience, and it was in that pursuit, probably about 10 years later, he discovered the written works of mathematician Schempp, who had explained the quantum hologram theory of what the universe was. And Edgar understood immediately that that could explain everything. It would explain his experience. It would explain the universe as we see it. It would explain much of the mysticism that appears in religious ceremony in all cultures, basically, on our planet. And he then pursued how he was going to form an institute to study the Samadhi experience.
And that institute became IONS.
That's the institute. Good for you.
Yeah.
That became IONS. And it soon became clear that he would have to part from IONS as well. He explored other means of funding, and that was when I met up with him at last. And we had some nice long chats because, we were attending a symposium at Rangeley, Maine, called the Cosmos and Consciousness series. And it turned out that the organizers had seized upon John Mack, Edgar Mitchell, and me to explore the nature of the cosmos, but at the same time of consciousness. And so it is that where Edgar was now living in Florida, and the conference was in Rangeley, Maine.
Yeah.
Call that bloody nowhere. It's on a beautiful, peaceful lake. And so Edgar had to get to Rangeley. So he called me up and said, Rudy, would you pick me up at the Portland airport and drive me up to Rangeley when you go yourself? And I did. And at a later time, he again went to Rangeley with me, picking up at Boston. And so he stayed at my home for the evening, and we had a nice dinner together. And I had long chats with Edgar about what he had discovered in his pursuit of the mental universe and what I was discovering in black holes, the gravitational signatures of dark matter, and all of that, and had a wonderful time together. We were having such a wonderful time in the ride to Rangeley that I missed my exit. We had to backtrack.
That's the best reason to do that.
There was an explorer who made his way on the moon.
Getting lost on a highway.
Had the backtrack to get to Rangeley.
Well, just a quick background for the listener, because when we talked about IONS, that's the Institute of Noetic Sciences. Noetic Sciences, yeah. That he founded in 73-ish. We had a couple of scientists from IONS already on the podcast, Dean Radin, Helane Wabe.
Dean Radin's great.
He is. He's really cool. Really cool.
I've discussed what we're doing with him a number of times, and he's very aligned with all of my work.
And you did mention him as well in Susie Hansen's book. I want to get to that too. So we talked about for the first time kind of at length, although not this at length, the way we're listening to you right now recount it, with Diana Pasalka, who first brought us on to Edgar Mitchell and John Mack and Rey Hernandez and Mary Rodwell and you. And
Okay.
and in that particular podcast, I read an excerpt from her book, which was a quote of Edgar Mitchell's explaining firsthand his experience, his metaphysical experience in the capsule coming back from the moon. Yeah. So we read it on the podcast. So I just wanted to provide that. You, on the other hand,
And for your audience, it should be said that it's in his book titled The Way of the Explorer by Edgar Mitchell.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. The Way of the Explorer. So maybe we'll put that in the show notes too. So going back to you and the long car rides, this is fascinating stuff. You had talked about an issue that NASA was having with astronauts that he had told you about, and their experiences in space. You want to share one or two of those?
Very fascinating, because remember now, we're exploring the nature of consciousness and how that relates to our reality, our perceived reality of things which have mixed in with their description within the universe, a physical being, a three-dimensional or 3 plus time dimensional description of their interactions as described by Newton, modified by Einstein. So there's that description, but there's also parallel with that, the quantum description. And that's the part where you start to bring in the human brain and the animal brain as well. And this story is interesting because it shows the closeness of human and animal consciousness. So Edgar Mitchell told it to me this way. He said that NASA rarely talks about a problem that astronauts encounter sometimes in their space missions, typically orbiting the Earth. They do their extravehicular activities, maybe launching a smaller capsule or doing something to tune up their spacecraft, or maybe just doing research on extravehicular activities. And anyway, Edgar says there is a problem with extravehicular activities. He said that we never appreciated or expected this, but he said it's extremely disorienting to live in a space capsule because your sense of space, up, down, gravity is all confused. And likewise, your sense of time is all confused. I mean, think about it. We're accustomed to a sunrise every morning and a sunset in the afternoon. Now, what happens to your psychology when this is a 90-minute cycle? That is to say, a sunrise and 45 minutes later, a sunset, and now you're in darkness. And so your adjustment to your being in the universe is all
inside out.
Warped.
Yeah.
It's completely warped. And so that's only a part of it, because it's also true that you're weightless in space. And that means that you don't have a reliable indicator of where your down is. We know that down is where your feet have to push against. And everybody knows, and that's their reference to all of their daily activities, is knowing where down is. So the astronauts become extremely disoriented in space and time. And so it is that occasionally, and this is literally the example that Edgar gave to me. He said, occasionally an astronaut's consciousness will slip out of his body and into the conscious experience of an elephant which you are now sharing. You are sharing the consciousness of an element, and that means it's not that you see a drawing of an elephant on a piece of paper, but rather you're experiencing his sense of terror when he knows that when those two mountains are lined up, I'm in the valley and I will see a tree, and next to the tree is a pond, and that's my watering hole. But the mountains are lined up and I don't see the tree, and I need water real bad. So there's terror in the elephant's psychological experience, and you share that experience. And you're in a capsule, a fly orbiting above the Earth. This does not work out. This will not end well. Well, it does, actually. Eventually, the experience passes, but think about what this actually means for the nature of consciousness. It means consciousness is a thing in the universe, and you can be in contact, sharing the human experience or the animal experience of being that thing. That has enormous repercussions. It means that animal consciousness is not so far from human consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
Their experience of vision is probably very much like our experience of vision, or smell, or touch, or hearing. They must share those experiences much the way we do. So that has given me a lot to think about over the years. And I don't know if Edgar has really shared this with anybody else.
The first time you told me, although not in so much detail, I was floored by this example. Like it's so unbelievable but jarring. And now the second time with the details about the mountains, the water, the tree, it's very impactful. Like I cannot deny that I'm impacted by this.
Yeah.
So it can't be. I mean, if this is true, and I don't doubt it to be true, it can't be a stretch to believe or think or know that an astronaut's experience could also have them share consciousness with other human beings as well.
Absolutely. And there are some human beings that have fine-tuned this and do it to a high level, shared another human's consciousness and known their terror. Probably dying mothers share a consciousness with their children and things of that kind.
Well, and so you've spoken about this. You've written about this as well, about the shared death experience, near death experience, psychism, mediumship. Rey Hernandez talks about it as well.
Yes, the books are full of it, and
the contact modalities.
The contact modalities. Good, thank you.
And you bridge this with your own work on black holes. So you have attempted to educate me, and I'm a little bit of a blockhead. So my apologies. But you did in the last episode that we recorded explained that the black holes act or hold our thoughts and hold
That's
our
correct.
emotions.
Mm-hmm. In fact, the history of your thoughts. And this is interesting. And let's explore that a little bit.
Okay.
Obviously, what Edgar Mitchell's experience with the elephant was, and by the way, Edgar Mitchell chose elephant as an example. That's not of my origin. That's what Edgar said to me. And so we conclude from this that the consciousness is a thing in the universe. And I go to take the next step and say, well, it's buried in the quantum field. It's buried in that aspect of the universe that's not the mass of the universe, but the attribute of the universe that governs motions of particles and quantum states of being and atoms, the fact that there are only certain places that electrons can orbit in atoms and things of that kind. So we're to the point now of saying, okay, consciousness is a something that's within the quantum field. Now, what does the quantum field do with this? Well, the quantum field carries it over the whole universe because of the holographic nature of information storage by the quantum field. That's the mathematics of Schempp brought into life by our consciousnesses. And so,
silly question, Rudy. And I really mean that silly question. Why? I mean, you mentioned Schempp now twice, and his mathematics of the quantum hologram, and Edgar's adaptation, and then yours as well. Why haven't we been studying this in school?
Yeah. Well, the first problem is that it's a highly mathematical concept, and it takes a person typically who has been educated through the calculus to understand that there can be a field of being, a three-dimensional field of being, our daily experience of a three-dimensional universe, and that there can be a supra field that attaches to the three or four-dimensional physical field, and that has additional properties that allow humans to latch onto those possibilities and do things that people like Newton couldn't at all address or understand. And even Einstein was puzzled by it.
Well, I mean, in high school, in senior year of high school, we're taught calculus and algebra. I mean, so it is a basic form of the calculus that you went on to learn then in university and in your PhD and in your studies. But it's still a calculus. Like, why is it that a 16, 17, 18-year-old can't learn about at least the basics of the quantum theory or quantum hologram theory?
I suppose there is no reason. It's just who will teach the course to
you
7 billion people.
7 billion. Well, you can, and like-minded academics can. Why not?
So there is no why not, and I'm doing the best I can.
Of course you are. Of course. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we're excited to have you on here too. And again, forgive me for asking these questions, but I'm going to keep asking them. So maybe I'm not asking for forgiveness.
No, you don't need forgiveness. There are no dumb questions here.
Yeah, thank you for being nice. Okay, so I did interrupt you there, but before we move on again, we had Ia Whiteley, and she was a space psychologist, has worked for NASA, European Space Agency as well. By the time this goes to record our conversation here, or excuse me, gets launched, we will have had Ia already on the podcast. She spent her career dealing with professional intuition, specifically with pilots and astronauts. So she actually, she's one of the few people in the world, as far as I understand, who actually studies in the field how experts make decisions, how they think in the heat of the moment of being at the edge of their capabilities.
So, and often as a life and death matter.
Yes, correct. Because an astronaut and a pilot always has to have in their head the worst possible outcome.
That's correct.
As they're making decisions. Yeah, so she is studying right at the edge of human capability. And she mentioned to me that astronauts, more often than not, come back to planet Earth ostracized and feeling ostracized. They go through an experience that is so profound, and they're not allowed to talk about it the way usually they want to. They want to keep their careers and jobs, so they keep their mouth shut in public. But it's the public that asks them the obvious question, not, did you pick up rocks from the moon? Did you do this? Did you do that? Ultimately, the first question and the main question an astronaut gets asked is, how did it feel being in space?
Oh boy.
Right? So Ia Whiteley explains this about the experience of astronauts coming back and being asked these questions. And part of her work, and now I may be over attributing here, but so forgive me, anybody who's listening, including Ia. Feeling is part of the expert's equation when they're exercising their professional intuitiveness. So we use, or she uses, but we discussed the surgeon, how two surgeons of the same capability, both experts in a particular procedure, attack a specific procedure differently because they both have honed their expertise a little bit differently, but also assume that the other knows the path that he takes or she takes because it's obvious. So they don't explain it. They go by their intuition and the feeling in the moment of what they should be doing. So it's their intuitiveness, if I can say that. Where does intuition come from? Seeing as that you are an expert of black holes, I thought maybe we could make that connection too, unless I'm overreaching.
Yes. I would say that intuition comes from your opening your mind and opening to an understanding that the universe is speaking to us constantly, that is, it's creating our environment, our mental environment. And whatever resonates with our brain's wiring, consciousness seizes or goes in that direction. And at some point, I'm going to have to tell you what the act of consciousness actually is. But it's a fairly long and complicated thing to explain because consciousness does so many things all at the same time that it's the subject for an entire broadcast. But to answer your question, it's this opening of the mind to the mind of the universe that puts you in touch with that part of the speakings of the universe that most align with your own thoughts. And so that's what empathy is. It's re-experiencing that attribute or aspect of the universe that describes all other feeling and thought.
You told me back in the fall 2023 that 2 months prior, you were vying for a particular, as a professor emeritus at Harvard, you're also involved, you're still involved at the university, and that you were vying to be on a committee to that would have dominion over designing new undergraduate degrees and courses.
This occurred actually about a year ago when somebody, one of my colleagues, knew that I was on a path that was extremely interesting, but I wasn't talking about it within the university. And we have a organized committee that talks about the overall program of our department at Harvard University, which joins with the Smithsonian Institution and together forms the Harvard Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics. And it's kind of a advisory board to the director about what the staff at this combined center, what the staff feels is the direction we should be going with our pursuit of knowledge. And at that time, I was fascinated by the fact that the U.S. government was now acknowledging the existence of the UFO. Everybody was agreed that the F-16 pilots had seen something that was extraterrestrial, not of terrestrial origin, and therefore we were being visited by non-human intelligence. And I went before this committee by a process of the voting by the committee members. in which I was a nominee to the committee. As I say, one of the committee members recommended me as having perhaps the most far-reaching ideas. And so we were each, as nominees to the committee, asked to write a paragraph or two about what is your vision for the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics, which I did. And I put in a part, or it was about, my entry was about, shouldn't we be investigating the thing that's hardest to investigate, which is the UFO phenomenon? Why can't that be the subject of an intellectual academic research? And so I said in my paragraph that I would like to see us foster a program in extraterrestrial UFO visitation studies. And I ended it with the sentence, we must ask ourselves, will Harvard University be the first to engage in this endeavor or the last? And I let it go to a vote. And all that happened was that the chairman of the committee sent me an email saying, we had our meeting and our vote, and you didn't pass. Nothing more than that. And I got the message loud and clear. And so that's the way it is.
Well,
I was impressed at the time by the beautiful piece of work that Rey Hernandez had done, showing that statistically, people who report contact with a UFO seem to have a changed mind about things. Things happen to them. And I pointed out that they tend to become interested in other, what might be called psychological phenomena. And I started to recite the near-death experience, or the remote viewing, or horse whispering, cattle whispering, falcon whispering. All of these things show that in our psychology, we have tremendous gifts of communication if only we will use them. And Ray's book offers so much profound statistical evidence for this, where he summarizes 4,000 examinations, each one taking the volunteer who has shown or who has seen a UFO and has therefore applied to take this examination. It takes 8 hours to complete, has 600
questions.
840 or something questions. And it covers all these areas of near-death experience and remote viewing, etc., as I said before. And we now have very profound statistics about this. Why couldn't that be a textbook for such a course on UFO studies? It is my belief that once you see a UFO, that UFO has emanations that are like light, but are mathematically sufficiently different from light that they need to be studied independently. And once your brain is exposed to this not light, kind of light, then the brain becomes rewired. Now you go forth with a rewired brain and find, oh, strange things are happening to me. I'm somehow in communication with that crow. I know exactly what he's thinking.
Right.
Or the elephant example of Edgar, or other things. You are now brain wired to accept and understand and you take on these additional capabilities.
So this is why this is a main reason why we wanted to speak to Mary, Rey, and yourself, because we've been finding through our own independent search here on this podcast through people who have undergone significant near-death experiences, psychiatrists, bona fide psychiatrists who have actually studied near-death experiences for years, researchers, people who have witnessed UFOs like Eric Wargo and Kevin Day and have had their brain rewired, and they explain how.
As you said, as I said.
Yeah. And how all of this is interrelated with many of the other things that we're discovering, like changing or dream patterns.
Yes, absolutely.
The consciousness of astronauts, as we've been learning through Ea Whiteley as well, and through her research. So we see, like, we've been seeing this actively, just talking to people.
It's leaking in.
Yeah.
You have no choice.
Well,
you're surrounded by it.
funny you say that, because we actually feel we have no choice here. The seal has been broken with all these stories and all these experiences that we've been listening to, that we have no choice other than to just delve in and understand it more. Like, why wouldn't you? Is the question.
Well, you might if you're a university professor. And it's not in any of the approved textbooks.
Well, we spoke to Mike Masters. So you and I chatted about him via email recently. So Mike Masters is a professor. He's a biological anthropologist out of University in Butte, Montana.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
Right.
I went to his webpage and read what he says about himself and his work.
Yes. So he again, fearless. I mean, he's had personal experiences, very similar to what we've just described right now, both you and I. And he has been unafraid in delving into the asking the what ifs and the why nots. And so one of his theories was that what we call aliens are, in his words, his theory is that they're future human beings coming back to visit us through time. Whether I agree with him or not, or anybody agrees with him or not, his university actually supports his research.
Oh, splendid. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
What university is this? They're to be congratulated.
It's at, I can't believe it escapes me now, but it's the Technological University of Montana, something like that. Tech University of Montana.
Yes, that's right. Okay. That's what it was.
Yeah. And they actually asked him to
teach.
Have
you ever been to Montana?
No, I haven't. Only through the movies.
Well, I have. And it's my experience that there's nothing there.
Well, there's a lot of archaeology and a lot of anthropology being done.
Yes,
for sure.
And a lot of cattle.
Yeah. Well, we had Jack Horner on the show. Oh, speaking of a coincidental story, just as like a side note, we reached out to Jack Horner, who is one of the leading archaeologists, paleontologists in the world, and he's from Montana. And so what did he do on the day of our recording? He brought up into the screen for me right before we recorded 2 tickets. And excuse me, let me create some background. He was actually on the movie set as a consultant to Jurassic Park, the original Jurassic Park in 1993. So he shows me these tickets. I said, "What is this?" He goes, "Well, this is the 30th anniversary of Jurassic Park." I go, "Yeah, that's right. 2023, 30 years ago." He goes, No. Today is the anniversary, the 30th anniversary. We recorded on the day of the premiere of that movie. Anyway.
So you're asking if that's a coincidence?
Well, maybe that's my question.
But I would like to talk to you about Mike's thesis.
Yes, let's go.
That it may be that aliens are returning to look at the results of their experiences of their hybrids, and I suspect that's true in part, but not true of all of the alien experiences. That is to say, I suspect that some percentage of them, and I'm guessing it's something like 5%. And that's just pulled out of the air
Sure.
intuitively. But so many people have given such viable accounts of things that are, of past lifetimes of theirs that they're encountered with. That's another one of the syndromes that you get with this rewiring of the brain, is that you're more aware of things stored in the quantum hologram, and you can remember past lives surprisingly well. And so, with these people having a long recent history, I can't easily quite square that up with Mike's position that they're just doing the every centennial visit to see how their various breeding programs have worked out. But there would be some. It makes sense. And I also tell people who do have the experience of seeing a UFO, well, were other members of your family also reporting similar things? In other words, did your parents, either one of them or both, see a UFO? And well, yes, as a matter of fact, they told me about that. And so it is true, apparently, that the aliens are following the family lines of the aliens that they have, the hybrids that they have produced, and they do come back and check up on them and interact with them, and maybe do a tune-up now and again. I don't know, but there have been reports of miraculous healings. I'd call that a tune-up.
Sure.
And it might be a psychological tune-up. It can take many forms. But anyway, I believe that Mike Masters is correct in what he said, but I believe that the UFO phenomenon is much larger than that. And it is, as Susie Hansen says, is concerned with the well-being of our planet and trying to intercede where it seems that they can make a difference if people just will wake up.
Wow. The only other quote that I wanted to read from her book to you,
Okay.
Dovetails immediately and perfectly into what you've just finished saying. And that's on page 77. Isn't that interesting? I mean, so Susan Hansen's book. So I admit I have made lots of notes, as you see here.
Good for you.
Right? But I have not finished reading the book, and because it's also ontologically jarring, and it's and I don't mean that in a negative way. It's
Now you want to think about this, man.
yeah. I have to pause a lot.
You were never expected to see something like this.
No, not at all. And in fact, I'm training myself to read it as a fiction, as a body of fiction, so that I can absorb it better.
You can hold it at a distance for a while until it's comfortable.
Yeah. So I get it's a defense mechanism, but it's not one of skepticism. It's because I want to absorb it. But I guess there's healthy skepticism. But anyway, this is what I wanted to read. It was very, very quick, and it was a conversation that she was having. So I'll pick it up here. It says, similarly, there is stagnancy in this part of the galaxy, and there are moves to rectify this on Earth and bring mankind back into line with the universal flow and expansion. Is this stagnancy a natural progression, or has something been influencing it? And the answer, which is an answer you actually provide a footnote for in this book, the answer is, it is a natural consequence of growth and movement on the universal scale and on a scale of consciousness. In the flow and expansion of consciousness, mankind's consciousness is on the outer eddies and is being, in quotes, retrieved, so to speak, mankind is being brought back into the flow.
Beautiful.
It's funny that you mentioned this, as I had this as the only other quote to read to you. And your footnote here, because you provide input throughout the book, Susie's book, your footnote is in respect to a quote unquote, it is a natural consequence of growth. And your note is, this is possibly a reference to the scientific revolution that accompanied the Renaissance around 1500 AD and on into modern times of the atomic era. Do you remember that?
If I can pick up on that a little bit,
Sure.
Susan Hansen. So let's go back a little bit and say just a little bit about how she is, or have you already introduced her?
I have not. We've spoken before, but she's not been on the podcast yet.
Okay. Well, let me say a few words about Susan Hansen.
Sure.
Susan Hansen lives in New Zealand, and she has had a career as a school teacher, but she's had a number of experiences with alien spacecraft. And in these experiences, which go back to her being age 6 or so, she has been, in its initial phases, intensively tested by the aliens. So they'll bring her up to a somewhat larger craft where she's in a room with some more children of approximately her age, and where they're subject to tests like a bunch of images get flashed by on their screen, and then she has to record how many of them she can remember. So it was a test of human skill, basically, and intelligence. And she was at the top of her class in all regards. And so she was chosen by the alien race to be the salvation of our civilization when the time gets rough. The time is likely to get rough, they fear, when our civilization is confronted by the fact that we are not alone and that we are in constant interaction with all of these alien visitors. You know that basically no two people see the same spacecraft. That's not quite true. But there are many handfuls of spacecraft that have been described, many handfuls of beings that have been described. And so we have a lot to learn, and there's danger of this being manipulated by some people, or it's possible that there will be fear here, because for there to be this new knowledge, there have to be some losers, like maybe the Catholic Church, or like maybe prominent universities, or who knows. But we are now absorbing such a broad body of knowledge that there has to be some stress associated with this. And she goes on to say that they understand this and are trying to prepare us for that time, and that she, Susie Hansen, is being trained specifically to calm the waters when this truth hits. That is to say, if there's panic and if there is political warfare or some other kind of warfare over this kind of knowledge, her job will be to calm the waters and tone it down. So she then describes about many of the other experiences that she's had on her spacecraft, and they are extremely telling about the nature of the universe. And that's why I seized onto her book and asked her to write commentary on it, because so much of what she reports as a human being, just having this as experience, I, as a scientist, see as part of a broader picture that we should also recognize. She says that at the time of World War II, we, of course, ended the war with the nuclear detonations at Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. These people are in trouble. They need help. And the universe gave the alien grays permission to, so to speak, interfere or ally with the human population to try to bring greater wisdom to our planet in its time of need. So the early history of the alien grays response was reported by Jim Sparks, where he reports in his book.
You did mention his book in the first recording, in our first episode. Yeah, I do remember that.
Alien Mind, maybe. He describes how they tried to force feed him into learning alien alphabet so that we have communication between humans and alien beings using their means of communication in script and in language and in symbols. And so Jim was a tough ex-Marine and was not having any part of this and resisted, and they started force feeding him, and it did not go well. Apparently, that program became abandoned, and the program of abduction started, a breeding program, and that's where John Mack comes in. He was a psychiatrist who, in his professional practice, was hearing all this extraordinary stuff that people were being in communication with alien beings who had come into our planet and were flying around in spacecraft and doing sexual experiments, collecting sperm samples from our males, collecting and reinserting fertilized or unfertilized eggs. And when you read this, you have to think about the Christmas story, because what is that? But the angel appeared unto Mary. Behold, I bring you tidings of great joy, which shall be to all the people. And we're supposed to celebrate the life of Jesus. And all of that is so like the alien abduction story. So
wow.
They're among us, have been. They're in our religious tradition, and this has probably been going on for a very long time.
We did briefly talk about the parallels with religion with Dan and Pasolka as well. And
with Michael?
No, with Diana Pasolka. She's a professor of religion in North Carolina. And I mentioned this to you before, so maybe in our next conversation we can talk about the one that we will have recorded by then. Actually, he was in a Netflix series that's on now called Encounters. He was in the first episode. The second episode, they actually have clips of John Mack interviewing those kids in Zimbabwe. But the first one is with Matthew Roberts, who is going to be on this podcast very soon. And he was an experiencer, and he had a physical experience with one. And maybe we'll talk
enough
about
said.
that. Yeah, enough said.
Until we know what we're talking about.
Fascinating. So one last question here before we end off this conversation. What changed for you? Like the old Rudy, who had the pencil in hand, doing ultra complex mathematics as an astrophysicist and astronomer. What changed? What made you pivot into understanding more about the consciousness universe and being open to talk about this?
What happened was my meeting John Mack. Now,
that was it.
I shouldn't say meeting, because I had known him before he realized that we have to talk. And so I think I told you about how we actually met and how that went and what happened after that. So that's really what changed my mind. I don't mind saying that until that time, I was very much downplaying the UFO reporting thing. I remember being a little jerk and saying, "Oh, come on, you're saying that they're here and they're in spacecraft appearing on the Earth. Come on. What do you know about our space program? I said. What you know is that everywhere we go, we leave junk. So where is the alien garbage? Where is the junk that is inevitably left behind by their visitation? So I took a negative public stance against it and have to take it all back.
I didn't ask you this before, so I'm sorry for not making, not creating that link that it was the John Mack story with you, and I should have known that, or at least I should have figured that out. Did it bruise your ego?
Not at all. No, I said, hurrah, we have something more to learn.
Huh. It was that
There's
simple.
a great whole world out there that we don't know about. Let's go find out what's going on here. You don't bruise a scientist that easily, you know.
Well, I mean, there are scientists that have been bruised that you mentioned at the beginning of this conversation that
How about that?
Don't wish you well, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Rudy, you don't disappoint. It's,
and we had a lot of fun.
Yeah, this is very good. So I'm going to make you promise to do a part 3 very, very soon.
Okay, I promise. And you can help that along by sending me more of these materials as they come up
100%.
with your finishing up work on other podcasts. And we talk about maybe doing a podcast with 2 other individuals, if that's indicated. So this could have a longer future. There's plenty of me ahead. So
excellent, because there's, as I showed you my notes of themes, there's about half of these that we didn't even touch. So just on that alone, that's another episode. Easy.
Okay, that's guaranteed. Fine.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be able to speak my mind and talk to people logically about experiences that are now documented, and you kind of have to believe in them. But there's so much more that people can latch onto in this way and think about maybe their own experiences and put them in context and maybe open more minds. And that's the alien agenda.